believe that one of the reasons we've had such a hard time getting our economy going again is because of the huge deficits that are being racked up by this president and by politicians in Washington. I will slay the deficit beast. It's killing jobs, it's shadowing our future, and it's keeping our kids from having the bright prospects they deserve. Now, how am I going to go about doing that? You might say, look, everybody says they're going to cut back on deficits, and actually I've done some calculations. If I become president, by the end of my first term, I want to make sure that we've cut about $500 billion out of federal spending. And I'm going to do that by combining three different approaches. First of all, I'm going to cut out some programs we just don't need. And I get your list. All right? But let me tell you, the first on my list is the easiest to cut. I'm going to get rid of ObamaCare. That will save $95 billion a year by 2016, so I'm going to get rid of ObamaCare. But then there are other things we're doing that I like, but that we simply can't afford. Now, you might ask, well, what's your test going to be if you look at federal programs and you try and decide which to keep and which not to keep? And it's a test that I employed back when I was a governor. I divided our spending between those things we had to do and those things we just liked doing. And we stopped doing a lot of the things we disliked and instead focused on what we had to do. My test for the federal government is this. Is this program so critical, so important, that it's worth borrowing money from China to pay for it? Knowing that I and my generation can't possibly pay it back, but we're going to pass that on to our kids and our grandkids. Is it that important? And by that test, a lot of things I like, we're going to have to stop. We'll probably stop sending money to subsidize Amtrak for almost a couple of $1 billion a year. We'll probably have things, I like the National Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I like the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities. These are wonderful things. But I'm not willing to borrow $1 billion to pay for things we don't absolutely need. We can't keep buying and spending and passing on debts to our kids. And I'll stop it by killing programs. Now, the second thing I'll do is I'll take some programs that the government has that we need. Some safety net programs, for instance. And I'm going to take those and send them back to the states with the money that goes with them and let the states manage them. Because at the state level, there'll be more attention paid to fraud and abuse. There'll be more innovation because you'll have 50 states competing with each other. And the programs will be run more efficiently and in a way that's designed to meet the needs of the people in different states. What it means to be poor in Massachusetts is different than what it means to be poor in Mississippi or Montana or Iowa or New Hampshire. There are differences between states. And I'll let states run programs like Medicare, excuse me, Medicaid, not Medicare, Medicaid, which is a health program for the poor. And then I'll also look at programs like our federal workforce training programs. Do you know we have 47 different workforce training programs in Washington? And they report to 9 different agencies. Think of all the overhead associated with that. All right, I'm going to take those programs, collapse them down to one, and send them back to states and let states run workforce training in the way the people of each state feel is the best. So first is cutting out programs. 2 is sending it back to states. And by the way, how much money do we save by sending programs back to states? Medicaid alone, by being sent back to the states and growing the funding by inflation, CPI plus 1% a year, will save $100 billion from what happens with the federal Medicaid program instead of a state Medicaid program. And the third thing we got to do, and this is pretty tough, to make government simpler, smaller, and smarter, we have to take government itself and make it more productive and more efficient. And you know what efficiency is right here. You know how careful you are to make sure that everything you do is done in the most effective and efficient way it can be done, with as little input of cost as possible. We have to do the same thing at the federal government level. We've got too many employees there. Let me just tell you a little story to illustrate just how unproductive government can be, in part because it doesn't have competition and people have spent their life in the private sector running it. An example, the Navy. The former Secretary of the Navy under Ronald Reagan, his name is John Lehman. I met him. He said to me, Mitt, let me tell you some numbers. He said, during the Second World War, America produced 1,000 ships a year for the military, for the U.S. Navy, and the purchasing department at the Navy was roughly 1,000 people. He said during the Reagan years, he said by the time I came along, we were only commissioning 17 ships a year, but the purchasing department had grown to 4,000 people. Today, we commission 9 ships a year. Guess how big purchasing is? 24,000 people, Navy purchasing. We have to cut back on the scale of the federal government. And for me, that will start by reducing federal employees by 10%, do that through attrition. And then something else is just as important. And that's to make sure that people who work for government don't get higher pay and better benefits than people who work in the private sector. I'll link them